Hi, I'm Soudy Khan, Director of User Experience at Neuron. Welcome back to our learning series. Today I'm going to talk about the members of a user experience team. And while these terms can be debated, this is sort of what I've come up with, having worked with a number of companies and having been a director, both full-time and interim at a number of companies. The positions I'm going to list first, then I'll go into some more detail about each one of those positions. The first one is the copywriter. The second one is the information architect, the user interface designer, the visual designer, the user tester, or the person in charge of user testing or usability research, the front-end coder, could be a prototyper, and then the market researcher, and lastly, the director of user experience. So if we start with copywriter, a lot of people may say, well, why the copywriter? Isn't that really marketing? When I put together a UX team, the copywriter is one of the most important people. And let's just talk about why that is. Well, think about UI, think about UX, or whatever you want to call it. But if you look at a page, for example, on a website, say ESPN, what are we doing? We're really just communicating with words. And then we have symbols that represent words in the form of iconography. We have placement that represents hierarchy, and then we might have lines or other visual treatments or graphical effects that, put things into a group or a category, and that's how writers think. So the copywriter is one of the key positions for me on the UX team, and they're really working with me as the UX director. They're working with the rest of the team. They're working with marketing. They're making sure that we have the right messaging and that we know our content, right? The next person would be the information architect. That, along with the UI designer and the visual designer, are kind of the same thing, but looking at the world from a different point of view. The information architect is looking at things from 10,000 feet. So they're looking at the system level understanding. They typically have a background in library sciences, categorization, tools they might use are like card sorting and other things, classification. So they're sort of figuring out the sitemap and the big pieces. They might be working with the content strategist who's either on the UX team or part of the marketing team to figure out where all this content goes. So now we have not just content, for example, on a product coming from the manufacturer or the retailer, we have user-generated content in the forms of reviews. So all this content comes from different places. The UI designer is kind of zooming into about 100 feet. So that's the person in my mind who's typically working on the state screens, the wireframes, the flows, saying that if I go to this screen and I press this button, I go to this screen, or looking at key use cases or key scenarios. Like, for example, the checkout process. What does that typically look at? So rather than looking at things from a sitemap, they're getting down into the specifics of a particular scenario. They're creating the state screens and the flows that really define the interaction. Looking at it down at the 1 foot level is the visual designer. And they're so much more than making things pretty. Good visual designers are real strategists. They're experts in brand. They understand the strategic use of color and typography, layout, contrast. They're really a key asset. And they're looking at things at kind of the pixel level, making sure that all the visuals make sense and they're using colors for the right reason, not just because I like yellow, but maybe because yellow is used as something cautionary. Maybe it's part of the brand palette, right? So that's the visual designer. Next we have a user tester, or the person in charge of user testing. And even within that, there are so many sub sort of specializations, be it a moderator, producer, camera person. But the user tester, as you can imagine, is looking at how to test a product. Maybe early stages, exploratory testing, maybe late stages, validation, maybe comparative testing during market research. Next, we have the front-end coder, and this is kind of debatable whether the front-end coder is really part of the engineering team or part of the UX team. From my perspective, if that person is embedded within the UX team, mostly working on prototypes, kind of creating code so that we can test things, look at things, see how they work, and that could be simple code. So it's as simple as just creating clickable prototypes, which one could argue is not even code at all. Maybe they're doing something in Exure or Balsamic, or maybe they're actually knocking out some quick prototypes in HTML5, JavaScript. But that front-end coder, and that again is kind of biased towards things that can be done in front-end coding, is often the next person. Then there's a market researcher. This is someone who might be working closely with the user tester, working closely with the director of UX. And they're looking at who's our target market, who could benefit from this. They're also looking at what problem can we solve. And so they're going out there and they're doing market research, as by their name, market researcher, and they're talking to customers and they're providing that input into the UX team. And then as a product reaches a market, they often have that continuous flow of information, that iterative refinement and feedback. They're really key to making that happen. Lastly is the director of user experience. And just like the director of a movie, you might say, well, what does a director do? Well, in a director of a movie, often and more often than not, they didn't write the movie. They're not acting in the movie. They're not the producer. They're not the camera person. They're not the unit production manager. They're not the composer, the editor, any of those things. But their job is to make sure that in the end, the experience is cohesive and coherent, and it's on brand, and it delivers to the use cases and the problems that the company is trying to solve for its users. So they're really seeing this whole thing. They have to sort of see the overall picture, and so that all the pieces kind of fit together. And that's a director of user experience, just like the director in a film. So hopefully that will provide you some good information on the key members of a UX team. Clearly there are others that some might argue belong here, or some that don't belong here, but hopefully that gave you a pretty good definition. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.